I know what you buried under the rose garden, not the fertilizer. The other thing, the secret you pay a fortune in security to protect. And tonight, in front of everyone you need to impress, the woman who trims your hedges is going to say it out loud. Her name is Annika Vance. For 3 years, she's been the invisible hand that kept the grounds of Seo Jin's estate flawless. He's a philanthropist, an art collector, a king in this city, and she's the one person who knows his soil holds more than just roots. Tonight, the gala celebrating his new museum is filled with politicians and celebrities, but the only thing he'll hear is the voice of his gardener, asking a question that can bring his entire world down. What did she find? And why is she willing to burn her own life to tell it? 3 years ago, Annika Vance answered a classified ad for a groundskeeper. It promised good pay, private housing, and discretion. The last part she would learn was the entire job description. The estate was called Murraywan, 30 acres of sculpted gardens, artificial streams, and ancient pine trees transplanted at a cost that could fund a small hospital. It belonged to Choi Seo Jin. Publicly, he was the chairman of the Seo Foundation, donating millions to hospitals and art museums. The press called him the philanthropist prince. But in certain neighborhoods, in quiet conversations, he had another title, the White Dragon. The head of the most sophisticated smuggling ring on the West Coast. Annika didn't know any of that. She saw a job, a chance to use her degree in horticulture to get out of the cramped apartment she shared with 3 other freelancers. The interview was with the estate manager, a man named Park. He never smiled. He said the previous gardener had retired suddenly. He said the roses were particular. They required a specific blend of nutrients turned into the soil every spring and fall. The bags were delivered to the garden shed. She was not to use any other brand. She was not to ask about the blend. Annika agreed. The pay was 3 times the market rate. The cottage on the property was small but clean, with a view of the mountain. Her grandmother, who taught her every plant name she knew, would have wept to see it. The work was solitary and profound. She learned the rhythms of Murraywan. The head of security, a man with a scar through his eyebrow named Kwan, did a patrol at 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. exactly. The deliveries, food, wine, mysterious crates, came on Tuesdays and Fridays after dark. Seo Jin himself was a ghost. She'd see him sometimes, through the windows of the main house, a silhouette in a room full of art. Or walking to his car, surrounded by quiet men in suits who looked at everything and everyone at once. For 2 years, it was just a job. She pruned, planted, nurtured. The rose garden, a 1/4 acre of meticulously arranged hybrids, was her masterpiece. She followed the strange fertilizer regimen. The bags were unmarked, filled with a dark, granular mix that smelled faintly metallic, like old pennies. The roses thrived. They were the most vibrant, deep crimson blooms she'd ever seen. The first thing that didn't fit was small. A Monday morning, early spring. She was aerating the soil near the garden's centerpiece, a white marble fountain. Her trowel hit something hard, not a rock. She dug around it with her fingers and pulled out a shard of polished blue ceramic. It was part of a figurine, maybe. It looked ancient, valuable. She washed it off at the hose. It didn't belong in a flower bed. She took it to the estate manager, Park. He was in his office. He looked at the shard in her palm and his face went blank, not surprised, cold. Where did you find this? By the fountain, in the rose garden. He plucked it from her hand. It is nothing, trash from the previous owner. You will not find anything else. If you do, you bring it directly to me. You do not clean it. You do not show anyone. Do you understand? His voice was low, a threat wrapped in bureaucracy. She said she understood. That was the moment the job changed. The moment she realized the soil she worked every day wasn't just soil. It was a layer, and things were buried beneath it. She started to notice other details. The security camera covering the rose garden had a blind spot, a narrow wedge between the fountain and the old oak tree. It seemed like a flaw until she realized it was the only place where someone digging wouldn't be seen. The fertilizer deliveries. She once caught a glimpse of the manifest on the driver's clipboard. The sender wasn't a garden supply company. The listed name was Dawson Chemical. A quick secret search on her phone in her cottage that night revealed Dawson Chemical didn't make fertilizer. It specialized in industrial solvents, and according to a 3-year-old news article, had been investigated for environmental violations. Then came the nightmares, not hers, the house's. Twice around 2 in the morning, she was woken by the sound of a vehicle pulling around to the service entrance, not the usual delivery truck, a box van. And the sound that followed was the worst part, the low, mechanical grind of a portable industrial soil compactor. She knew that sound from a city construction job she'd worked in college. It's the sound you use to pack earth down, really, really hard. The next morning, she'd check. And there, in the rose garden, always in that camera blind spot, the soil would be ever so slightly disturbed, freshly turned, and the smell of that metallic fertilizer would be overwhelming, masking everything else. Annika began to map it in her mind: the deliveries, the compactor, the blind spot, the unmarked bags. It was a cycle, a burial cycle. She was the gardener. Her job wasn't to make things grow, it was to make sure nothing ever surfaced. The weight of the knowledge was a stone in her gut. She thought about leaving, but the money had paid off her student loans. It was sending her little sister to college, and a deeper, more stubborn part of her, the part that came from her grandmother, needed to know what was in the ground. Her chance came 7 months before the gala. Seo-jin was away on a philanthropic tour in Europe. The estate was quieter. One afternoon, a storm ripped through, a violent downpour that flooded the garden paths. The next morning, she went out to assess the damage. The rain had eroded the fresh-turned soil in the blind spot more than anywhere else. And there, partly exposed, was a corner of something that wasn't a rock or a root. It was black plastic, thick, the kind used in construction. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She glanced around. The security camera was pointed the other way. Kwan's patrol wasn't for another hour. She knelt, pretending to inspect a flooded rose bush. With her bare hands, she carefully brushed away more wet soil. The plastic was wrapped around something bulky. It was bundled with heavy-duty zip ties, and one of those ties had a torn, dangling end with a small, stiff tag attached. She pinched the tag between her fingers, wiped the mud off. It wasn't text, it was a symbol, a barcode printed next to a series of numbers, and above that, a logo, a stylized eagle and 3 letters, CBP. U.S. Customs and Border Protection. She let the soil fall back, covering the tag, her mind racing. This wasn't just some corporate waste. This was evidence, something that had been seized, logged, and then had vanished from the world. And it was buried in the garden of a man the city called a prince. Annika stood up, her knees muddy, her hands trembling. She had a choice: walk away, tend the roses, collect her pay, or pick up the thread and start pulling. That night in her cottage, she made a decision. She would document it, she would get proof. Not for the police. She'd seen how seamlessly Seo-jin's world operated, how many officials attended his parties. She needed leverage. She needed something so undeniable that if she ever spoke, the world would have to listen. She bought a tiny, waterproof camera. She began to take photos, not of the plastic, but of the cycle. The unmarked bags from Dawson Chemical, the license plate of the box van, a grainy, long-distance shot of the compactor being unloaded at 2:17 in the morning. She noted dates, times. She built a file. And she waited for the right moment, for a chance to look him in the eye, somewhere he couldn't have her silenced with a nod to Kwan. She waited for an audience. The invitation to the museum gala arrived at the main house. She saw the preparations. The crystal, the flowers, the guest list full of senators and socialites. It was the most public he would ever be. It was her moment. She cleaned her best pair of work pants. She kept her apron on. It was her uniform. It was the truth of what she was. As the first limousines arrived, Annika Vance left her cottage and walked toward the glittering lights of the main house. In her pocket was a single printed photograph, folded in half. It showed the torn tag with the eagle logo, half buried in the dark, rich soil of the Merriwen Rose Garden. She was done tending the flowers. Tonight, she was going to dig up the root. The ballroom was a sea of silk and champagne flutes. Annika moved through it like a stone through water, parting conversations, leaving stunned silence in her wake. All eyes were on the dirt streaking her apron, not the diamonds around their necks. She saw him across the room. Choi Seo-jin stood near the grand piano, holding court with a city councilman and a famous actress. He was smiling, the perfect host, the benevolent king. Annika felt the folded photo in her pocket. Her palms were slick. This was the moment. The entire 3-year performance, the cycle of burying and fertilizing and pretending not to hear the compactor in the night, led to these final 20 steps. A server tried to block her path with a tray of canapés. She sidestepped him without breaking stride. Seojin saw her when she was 10 feet away. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes changed. They flickered over her work clothes, her soil-stained hands, and the easy charm in his gaze hardened into a calculation. A problem had entered his perfect equation. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod to Kwan, who stood by a pillar. Kwan began to move. Annika spoke before he could reach her. Her voice was clear, louder than she intended, cutting through the murmur of the room. "Mr. Choi." The councilman and the actress turned, confused. Seojin's smile became brittle. "Can I help you? The staff entrance is around the back. I need to speak with you about the rose garden." "This is not the time. Park can handle any garden issues tomorrow." His tone was dismissive, a master shooing a dog. "It's not about the roses, it's about what's buried beneath them." A beat of silence. The piano music seemed to fade. Kwan was 3 steps away, his hand moving inside his jacket. Seojin held up a single finger. Kwan froze. The councilman chuckled nervously. "Buried treasure, Seojin, how poetic." Seojin's eyes never left Annika's face. "You are confused. The storm last year caused some landscaping issues. Old pipes." Annika pulled the photograph from her pocket. She didn't hand it to him. She held it up so he and the councilman and the actress could all see it. The grainy image of the black plastic, the torn zip tie, the clear CBP Eagle logo. This was not a pipe. This was buried 7 months ago, in the blind spot by the fountain where you've been burying things for years. The actress gasped. The councilman's smile vanished. Seojin's face was a mask of polished stone. He reached for the photo. Annika pulled it back. "No, I have copies, I have dates, I have pictures of the bags from Dawson Chemical you call fertilizer. I have the license plate of the box van that comes after midnight." The room was now utterly silent. Every guest within earshot was staring. Phones were subtly raised. Seojin's philanthropy was a public spectacle. His humiliation would be too. He leaned forward, his voice a low, venomous whisper meant only for her. "You have no idea what you are doing. You will destroy yourself." "I'm just the gardener," Annika said, her voice trembling but loud. "I'm just telling you what's in your soil. Customs and border protection property. Evidence. What are you hiding that needed to disappear from a federal evidence locker?" The word federal landed like a gunshot. The councilman took a step back. Seojin's control finally cracked. A vein pulsed in his temple. "You are fired. You will leave these premises immediately. You will be sued for defamation and trespassing." "Call the police," Annika said, the challenge hanging in the air. "Right now, let's all wait for them together. I'll show them the photo. I'll tell them where to dig." It was a bluff, but a powerful one. His world was built on shadows and quiet exchanges. A public police call, a digging crew on his lawn in front of the press. It was his worst nightmare. He was trapped, and the 300 witnesses made it a cage. Kwan took another step, his intention clear. But Seojin shook his head, a sharp, frustrated jerk. He couldn't have her dragged out, not now. The story would be worse. He straightened his suit jacket, a man trying to reassemble his dignity. "This is clearly a personal grievance. A disgruntled employee making fantastical claims. My lawyers will handle it." He turned to the stunned guests, summoning a shadow of his earlier charm. "Please, enjoy the evening. A minor misunderstanding." But the spell was broken. The misunderstanding was the only thing anyone would remember. Annika stood her ground. She had done it. She had said the words out loud. She had forced the white dragon to blink. She turned and walked back through the crowd. The path cleared for her this time not out of disgust, but out of fear and fascination. She could feel Seojin's gaze burning into her back. Back in her cottage, she locked the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. The adrenaline crash left her shaking. She had won the first battle, but she had just declared war on one of the most dangerous men in the city, and she was alone in his fortress. She was right to be afraid. The retaliation began before dawn. At 4:17 a.m., the internet connection in her cottage went dead. A few minutes later, the power followed. Then, the distinct sound of the locks on her front door being changed from the outside. She was being sealed in. She rushed to the window. Outside, in the pre-dawn gray, she saw Park and two other men loading all her gardening tools, her personal patio furniture, even her bag of potting soil into a truck. They were erasing her. She pounded on the door. "What are you doing? Let me out." Park's voice came through the wood, calm and final. "You have been terminated for cause. You are trespassing. Your belongings are being removed. You will be escorted from the property when security is ready." They were going to make her wait, isolate her, then dump her somewhere with nothing. Hopping disorientation and fear would silence her. But they'd made a mistake. They'd taken her tools, but they hadn't searched her. Not yet. In the darkness, Annika felt for the loose floorboard near her bed. She pried it up. Inside was a waterproof metal box, her evidence box, the originals of the photos, a thumb drive with all the files, and a worn, handwritten journal detailing every suspicious event for the past 18 months. She had prepared for this. She also pulled out a cheap, prepaid burner phone she'd bought months ago for exactly this scenario. No internet needed. She texted a single sentence to the only number saved in it. It started, "I'm locked in the cottage." The reply came 5 minutes later. "Hold tight, ETA 30 mins. Do not open the door for anyone but me." The contact was Leo Marani, a reporter for the ** Metropolitan Gazette. She reached out to him anonymously 6 months earlier, feeding him small tips about irregularities at Dawson Chemical that she'd pieced together from her research. She never met him in person. She never told him her name or where she worked. She was his confidential source, Green Thumb, until today. 30 minutes was a lifetime. She heard a vehicle approach outside, not a truck. A car, doors slammed. Then a new voice, loud and authoritative. "Police, open up." Her blood ran cold. This was their move, have her removed by police. She peered through the window's edge, a black sedan with no markings, two men in windbreakers approaching her door. They didn't look like beat cops. They looked like the kind of men Kwan would know. She didn't answer. They began working on the new lock. They were coming in. She clutched the metal box to her chest and backed into the small bathroom, locking that door too. It was flimsy. It wouldn't hold. She looked at the small, high window. It was her only way out. It led to the narrow space between her cottage and the hydrangea bushes. She heard the front door crash open. Heavy footsteps entered her living space. "Ms. Vance, come out now. We need to ask you some questions about your threats to Mr. Choi." She shoved the metal box through the window, letting it fall into the bushes below. Then, she hauled herself up onto the sink and squeezed through the narrow frame, tearing her apron and scraping her ribs. She dropped into the damp mulch just as the bathroom door splintered behind her. On her hands and knees, she grabbed the box and crawled. She moved through the landscaping, using the dawn light and her intimate knowledge of every bush, every tree, every contour of the land she'd tended for 3 years. She was a ghost in the garden she'd built. She made it to the tree line at the property's edge, where the sculpted garden met the wild forest. The 6-foot security fence was here, topped with razor wire. But she knew a section behind a thick growth of climbing ivy where the ground had eroded, creating a small gap underneath, just big enough for a person. An animal run she'd never reported. She shoved the box through first, then wriggled after it, the cold mud soaking into her clothes. She was out. She was on public land. A car was parked on the shoulder of the country road, its engine idling. A man leaned against the hood. Late 30s, rumpled coat, holding 2 cups of coffee, Leo Marani. He looked at her, covered in mud and leaves, clutching a metal box, and he just held out a coffee. Rough morning, Green Thumb. They drove. Annika told him everything, from the first bag of weird fertilizer to the Gala. She showed him the evidence. Leo stopped smiling. He plugged the thumb drive into his laptop right there in the car. He scanned the photos, the journal entries. "This isn't a story," he whispered. his reporter's cynicism melting away. "This is a grenade, and you just pulled the pin in front of 300 people." "What do we do?" Annika asked. "We publish fast, before he can spin it, before his lawyers can get an injunction. We go with what we can prove right now: the CBP tag, the Dawson chemical deliveries, the nocturnal burials. We let the public ask the question, what did Choi Seo-jin bury?" Leo worked from a noisy downtown diner. Annika sat in a corner booth, watching him type furiously. He made calls to contacts at customs, to environmental regulators about Dawson, to former employees of Seo-jin's businesses who'd always been too afraid to talk. Each call added another piece. A pattern emerged. Dawson Chemical was a shell company, ultimately owned by a holding corporation in the Cayman Islands. A corporation that had, until last year, listed Choi Seo-jin as a silent director. The fertilizer wasn't just a cover, it was a chemical mask. Leo had a friend at a lab run the photo of the granules. The preliminary analysis came back. The mix contained strong oxidizing agents and specific compounds used to accelerate the decomposition of organic material and neutralize DNA. They weren't just hiding evidence, they were dissolving it. Leo's article went live at 11. The headline was brutal: "Philanthropist's Garden of Secrets. Groundskeeper alleges evidence buried at Murraywan Estate." It featured the photo of the CBP tag. It named Dawson Chemical. It quoted Annika's Gala confrontation. It did not accuse Seo-jin of a specific crime. It just laid out the facts Annika had gathered and asked, loudly, for an official explanation. The internet erupted. The socialite gossip sites that had covered the gala now ran with the scandal. Gardengate, they called it. Memes of shovels and roses flooded social media. The serious news outlets picked it up, pressure mounting on customs and the DA's office to comment. Seo-jin's team responded exactly as predicted. They issued a statement calling Annika a mentally unstable former employee seeking revenge after being fired for negligence. They claimed the photo was a fake, the tag planted. They threatened to sue the Gazette for defamation. It was the playbook. But they'd miscalculated two things. First, the story had broken too big, too fast. And second, they'd underestimated the other witnesses from the gala. The actress who'd been standing there gave a hesitant, carefully worded interview to a talk show. She was very sure of herself, the actress said, and the look on Choi Seo-jin's face, it wasn't the look of someone dealing with a liar. It was the look of someone whose game had been discovered. The councilman, however, went silent. He checked into a hospital for exhaustion. That afternoon, as the news churned, Annika got a call on the burner phone. A number she didn't recognize. She answered cautiously. "Ms. Vance," the voice was female, older, trembling. "You don't know me, my name is Soo-jin. I was the gardener before you." Annika's breath caught, the one who retired suddenly. Bitter, quiet laugh. "I didn't retire, I saw something. I asked Park about a stain on the gravel by the service entrance. It looked like rust. He told me to forget it. I couldn't, I took a sample." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They came to my house. They showed me pictures of my granddaughter walking home from school. They said if I ever spoke, she would have an accident, so I retired, I moved. I have been silent for 5 years, until I saw your face on the news today." "What was the stain?" Annika asked, her mouth dry. "I had it tested. It was human blood, and not just any blood. They found a DNA marker, rare, specific to a missing person." "Who?" The woman on the phone took a shaky breath. "A federal informant. He was going to testify against the White Dragon's smuggling ring. He disappeared 4 days before he was due in court. The FBI has been looking for him for 5 years." Annika closed her eyes. It wasn't just smuggled goods in the garden. It wasn't just evidence. It was a body. The informant's blood was on the gravel, and his body was in the rose garden. The secret she had stumbled upon was no longer a white-collar crime. It was murder. And the man who owned the garden wasn't just a crime lord. He was a killer who used his own landscape as a graveyard. The line went dead. Annika stood in the safe house kitchen, the burner phone slick in her hand, the old gardener's words echoing, a body, a federal informant. The game was no longer about buried contraband. It was about a grave. She told Leo. He stopped typing. The color drained from his face. Okay, he said, running a hand through his hair. Okay, this just went from a corruption story to a homicide investigation. We have to go to the FBI now. We can't just walk in, Annika said, her mind racing. What if someone there is on his payroll? The CBP evidence was buried in his garden. That means someone on the inside helped it disappear. Leo nodded, a grin set to his jaw. We go to the press first, bigger, wider. We make so much noise that the FBI has to act publicly and they have to do it clean. But we need more than a phone call from a scared old woman. We need something they can't ignore. Annika thought of her metal evidence box. She spread the contents on the safe house table. The photos, the journal, the soil sample she'd secretly taken from the blind spot the morning after a burial, stored in a sealed bag. It was dark, granular, mixed with the metallic fertilizer. She kept it as proof of the odd soil composition. Now it might be evidence of something far worse. We test this, she said, holding up the bag, for human DNA, for anything. Finding a lab that would do a discreet, fast, and legally admissible forensic soil analysis took 24 hours and all of Leo's remaining contacts. They found a private forensic botanist, a woman named Dr. Aris, who specialized in cold cases where plant matter was evidence. She was expensive. Leo maxed out his credit card. While they waited, the public storm raged. Seo-jin's lawyers filed 3 separate defamation suits. They produced a signed affidavit from a soil expert claiming the CBP tag in Annika's photo was a common counterfeit, a prop used in film productions. They launched a smear campaign, digging up Annika's past, an old arrest at a climate protest in college, a dismissed dispute with a former landlord. The headline shifted subtly, troubled activist targets philanthropist. But the story had its own momentum. Other voices began to crack the wall of silence. A former truck driver for Dawson Chemical gave an anonymous interview to Podcast. He described making late-night deliveries to the Merriwan estate, signing manifests for industrial clay, and being paid in cash. A retired customs officer, speaking off the record, confirmed that a major evidence locker had reported inventory discrepancies 5 years earlier, around the time the informant vanished. The cases were never connected, until now. Seo-jin's world was under a microscope, and the heat was causing fractures. Then, the councilman who'd been at the gala was found dead in his hospital room. The official cause was a heart attack. He was 52. He had no history of heart problems. A nurse reported seeing a maintenance worker leaving the wing around the time of death. The worker was never identified. It was a message, a clear, brutal one. This is what happens. The fear was paralyzing. Annika couldn't sleep. Every car that slowed near the safe house was a threat. Leo started varying his routes, checking his car for trackers. The pressure was a physical weight. 3 days after the phone call, Dr. Aris's results came. Leo and Annika read the report together in silence. The soil sample contained traces of adipocere, a waxy substance formed by the decomposition of human fat in anaerobic, damp environments. It also contained microscopic synthetic fibers consistent with a type of heavy-duty body bag used by some law enforcement agencies. And mixed with the chemical fertilizer were faint traces of a sedative, midazolam, a drug not used in horticulture. The garden had consumed a human body. The fertilizer had tried to erase it, but the earth remembers. This is it, Leo said, his voice hushed. This is the proof. We take this to the FBI and we go to the biggest news outlet we can find at the same time. We create a firewall of publicity. They chose a veteran federal reporter at a national network. They also contacted the FBI field office, asking to speak to the agent in charge of the missing informant case. They played both sides against the middle, forcing a race to the truth. The meeting with the FBI was in a bland conference room at a federal building. 2 agents, Agent Miller, late 40s, weary eyes, who'd been the lead on the informant case for 5 years, and her partner, Agent Clark, younger, watching everything. Annika laid out her evidence: the photos, the journal, the soil analysis report. Agent Miller listened, her expression unreadable. When Annika finished, Miller leaned forward. The informant's name was David Park. He was helping us build a RICO case against Seo-jin's import-export business. He disappeared. We suspected he was dead. We never found a body or the evidence he was set to hand over. It's in the rose garden, Annika said. We can't get a warrant based on a soil sample and the word of a gardener, Agent Clark said, not unkindly. We need probable cause. We need something that directly links the location to the crime. Leo slid a final document across the table. It was a property survey of Murraywan, obtained from the county records. He had highlighted a section. The original landscaping plans for the Rose Garden were approved 5 years and 2 months ago. The work commenced 3 weeks after David Park was reported missing. The centerpiece fountain, it was a late addition. The plans were amended after the garden beds were already dug. It's the only structure with a foundation deep enough to require a 4-foot excavation pit. He pointed to another highlighted line. The contractor for the fountain was a shell company. It dissolved 6 months after completion, but its bank records show a single large payment from a subsidiary of Dawson Chemical. Agent Miller and Clark exchanged a long look. The room was silent. Finally, Miller stood up. Wait here. She left for 20 minutes. When she returned, her demeanor had changed. There was a sharp focus in her eyes. We're opening a full investigation. We will seek a warrant for ground-penetrating radar scans of the Murraywan estate. Your cooperation will be required. You will be placed in protective custody. It was happening, but as they were escorted out, Annika felt a cold dread. They were now inside the system, a system that had already failed David Park. The national news story broke that evening. It was devastating. It connected all the dots: the missing informant, the buried evidence tag, the chemical company, the mysterious fountain. It didn't accuse Seo Jin of murder. It simply asked why all the roads led to his garden. The public outcry was immediate and deafening. Dig Up the Garden trended worldwide. Protesters gathered outside the gates of Murraywan. The political cover Seo Jin relied on began to evaporate. Senators who'd praised him now called for a transparent investigation. Behind the scenes, the FBI moved fast. A judge, swayed by the public pressure and the evidence trail, signed the warrant for non-invasive scans. It was set for 2 days later. Seo Jin's response was not a legal one. It was a siege. His lawyers filed endless appeals, delaying tactics. More importantly, Murraywan went into lockdown. Private security teams patrolled the walls. Reporters and protesters were kept at a distance. It was a fortress. The night before the scan, Annika was in a new, more secure safe house, an apartment owned by the FBI. She was watching the news coverage when her personal phone, which she thought was turned off, buzzed. A text message from her sister. It was a photo of her sister's front door. A single deep red rose had been nailed to it. The text read, "Some weird flower delivery, THX, smiling face with smiling eyes." Annika's blood turned to ice. It was a message. He had found her family. He wasn't threatening her. He was showing her he could reach the people she loved. The photo was time-stamped 40 minutes ago. She called her sister, her hands shaking. "Celeste, are you okay? Who delivered that?" "I don't know. It was just on the doorstep when I got home. It's creepy. Why, what's wrong?" Annika couldn't tell her. She just said, "I need you to go to Mom's house. Right now, don't stay there tonight, please." She hung up and immediately called Agent Miller. She reported the threat. Miller was concerned, but calm. "It's intimidation. They're desperate. We'll send a car to check on your family. Stay inside. We're on schedule for tomorrow." But the rose was a crack in Annika's resolve. She had been brave for herself, but this was different. Seo Jin knew it. An hour later, Leo called, his voice tense. "We have a problem, a big one. My source at the courthouse says Seo Jin's team just filed an emergency motion. They're claiming the warrant is based on illegally obtained evidence. They're saying you stole the soil sample from private property. They're demanding a hearing tomorrow morning before the scan can proceed." It was another delay tactic, but it could work. A sympathetic judge could tie them up in court for weeks. Time Seo Jin could use to quietly excavate the garden himself. "They're stalling," Annika said. "They're not just stalling," Leo replied, his voice dropping. "My source said something else. The motion filing included a detail about the soil sample bag, the brand, the size. It's a specific detail that wasn't in any of our published stories. The only people who knew that detail were you, me, Dr. Aris, and the FBI. The implication hung in the silence. There was a leak. Someone inside the investigation was talking to Seo Jin. The safe house no longer felt safe. The system was compromised. They were on a clock, and the other side knew every tick. Annika looked out the window at the dark city. Somewhere out there, Choi Seo-jin was in his mansion, surrounded by his art and his guards, watching his world catch fire. And he had just shown her he could reach through the flames and burn her where it really hurt. The garden held his secret, but to get to it, Annika would have to walk back into the lion's den, past the lawyers, past the guards, past the traitor in the FBI's ranks. The warrant was a piece of paper. The truth was still buried in the dirt, and the man who put it there was ready to kill to keep it that way. Tomorrow, the scanners would arrive at the gates, but whether they would ever be allowed to scan the soil under the roses was a war that would be fought in a courtroom, in the media, and in the shadows. And Annika Vance, the gardener, was now the most wanted witness in the city. At 9 a.m., the emergency hearing began, but Choi Seo-jin didn't send his lawyers. He came himself. He walked into the federal courthouse surrounded by his legal team, but also by Kwan and two other stone-faced men. He wore a simple, expensive black suit. No tie. He looked calm. He looked like a man who had already won. The cameras exploded. This was the White Dragon, leaving his fortress to face his accuser in the one arena he couldn't control with money alone, a public courtroom. Annika watched from a monitor in a secure room with Agent Miller. Her stomach was a knot. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Watanabe, took the bench. Seo-jin's lead attorney, a silver-haired man who charged $2,000 an hour, presented the motion. His argument was slick, patronizing. He painted Annika as a thief who had trespassed, stolen private property, the soil sample, and then built a fantasy to extort his client. He called the warrant fruit of the poisonous tree. He demanded it be quashed and all evidence derived from it, including the soil analysis, be thrown out. Then he played his trump card. He submitted a sworn affidavit from the former head of security at the evidence warehouse where David Park's case files had been stored. The man claimed the CBP tag was part of a batch that had been decommissioned and sold as movie props years ago. He said it was impossible for it to be evidence. He was lying, but on paper, under oath, it was enough to sow doubt. Judge Watanabe listened, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to the federal prosecutor. Your response. The prosecutor, a young woman named Cho, stood. Your Honor, the soil sample was obtained from a location where the witness had a reasonable expectation of access as an employee. But more importantly, we are not relying solely on that sample. We have new, independent evidence that provides probable cause. She nodded to the back of the courtroom. The doors opened, and in walked the former gardener Soo-jin, the woman who had called Annika. She was small, frail, supported by her daughter, but her voice was clear as a bell. She approached the witness stand, was sworn in, and told the court everything. The blood stain, the threat to her granddaughter, her own soil test, which she had kept hidden for 5 years in a safety deposit box. She had brought the report. It matched Annika's findings. Seo-jin's calm facade cracked for a second. He hadn't accounted for her. He thought she was too broken, too afraid. Then Prosecutor Cho called her next witness, Leo Marani. He took the stand and detailed his investigation, the shell companies, the Dawson chemical payments, the amended fountain plans. He presented the financial records. He was a reporter, not a cop, but his documentation was meticulous. The hearing stretched for 4 hours. It was no longer about a warrant. It was the trial happening right there. Judge Watanabe finally held up a hand. I've heard enough. The motion to quash is denied. The warrant for ground-penetrating radar stands. It will be executed today under federal supervision. Court is adjourned. Seo-jin stood up. He didn't look at the judge. He looked directly at the camera in the corner of the room, as if he could see Annika through the monitor. His eyes were empty, cold. Then he turned and walked out, his security detail clearing a path through the press scrum. The convoy to Meriwin was a spectacle. FBI vehicles, forensic trucks with the radar equipment, and a swarm of news helicopters overhead. The estate gates were opened under court order. The private security stood down, outnumbered and out-authoritied. Annika was there at Agent Miller's side. She had insisted she needed to see it. They stood at the edge of the rose garden as the technicians wheeled the GPR unit over the manicured grass. The machine looked like a lawnmower dragging a flat antenna. It sent electromagnetic pulses into the ground, painting a picture of what lay below on a screen. The first pass over the blind spot near the fountain showed nothing but uniform soil. Annika's heart sank. Had they moved it? Had the leak warned them in time? Then the technician made a second, slower pass, and there it was. On the screen, about 3 feet down, a distinct, rectangular anomaly, too uniform to be a rock, the right size and shape for a large container or a body. "There's something here," the technician said. They marked the spot with orange flags. Then they scanned the rest of the garden. They found 3 more anomalies, all in areas that had been freshly turned during Annika's tenure, all buried at the same depth. The forensic excavation team moved in. They worked with trowels and brushes, not shovels. The world watched live as they carefully peeled back the layers of soil and the dark, metallic fertilizer. The smell was acrid, chemical. The first thing they uncovered was a heavy-duty black plastic bundle wrapped in zip ties, just like in Annika's photo. An evidence tech cut it open. Inside were sealed plastic bags containing documents, USB drives, and what looked like ledger books. The evidence David Park had died for. The second anomaly yielded another bundle. This one contained several kilos of a white powder, later confirmed to be pure fentanyl, stamped with a smuggling trademark linked to Seojin's network. The third spot, near the roots of an ancient rose bush, was different. The GPR had shown a larger, more organic shape. The diggers worked with even more care. They uncovered the remains of a body, badly decomposed but intact, wrapped in a heavy-duty tarp. The medical examiner on site confirmed it was an adult male. A forensic anthropologist noted a distinct fracture in the right forearm, an old injury. David Park's medical records, obtained hours later, showed he had broken that arm as a teenager. They had found him. They had found all of it. As the sun set on Muriwan, Choi Seojin was arrested at his downtown penthouse. He was charged with murder, kidnapping, obstruction of justice, narcotics trafficking, and a litany of financial crimes. His empire, built on philanthropy and fear, collapsed in a single day. The philanthropist prince was remanded without bail. The leak in the FBI was uncovered within a week. It was Agent Clark, Miller's partner. He had been on Seojin's peril for years, a mole placed to monitor any investigations into his network. He was arrested too. The fallout was tidal. Politicians, business leaders, and even a judge were implicated in the subsequent investigation. The Seo Foundation was dissolved. The art collection was seized. Muriwan itself was declared a crime scene and later sold at auction. The gardens dug up and returned to a natural state. For Annika, the victory was quiet. The threats against her family stopped. The defamation suits were dropped. She was offered witness protection, but she declined. She wanted to be seen. She testified at Seojin's trial, her voice steady as she described the burial cycle, the metallic smell, the midnight compactors. He never looked at her. After the trial, which ended in a conviction on all counts and a sentence of life without parole, Annika tried to return to a normal life. But there was no normal anymore. She was a public figure. She used her unexpected platform to start a nonprofit, helping the families of missing persons navigate cold cases and push for forensic gardening techniques. She called it the Root Foundation. Leo wrote the book that became a bestseller. He and Annika remained close friends, bound by the secret war they'd fought. But the garden held one last, quiet secret. A year after the excavation, during the final clearing of the estate before auction, a crew was removing the marble fountain. Beneath its concrete foundation, they found a small, lead-lined box. It wasn't on any GPR scan. It had been buried before the fountain was poured. Inside the box was not evidence of a crime, but of a conscience. It contained a single handwritten letter dated just after David Park's disappearance. The writing was elegant, precise. It was from Seo Jin's wife, who had died of cancer 2 years before Annika arrived. In the letter, she confessed to her husband that she had discovered his true business. She wrote of her shame, her fear for their young daughter. She begged him to stop. She said she had taken a single piece of evidence, a diamond intended as a payoff to a customs official, and hidden it as insurance, hoping he would change. He never did, and the letter, his wife's final plea, had been buried under the fountain, a monument to his crimes and a tomb for his last shred of humanity. He had built his graveyard on top of her heartbreak. Annika learned about the letter from Leo. She read a copy. She felt no triumph, only a profound sadness for all the lives consumed by the garden's darkness, the informant, the wife, the old gardener Sujin, and even, in a twisted way, for the man who had chosen to live in that darkness until it swallowed him whole. One Tuesday morning, in the small backyard of her new home, Annika planted a rose bush. Not a hybrid, not a prize-winning cultivar, a simple, wild rugosa rose. It was tough, resilient, and it would grow in almost any soil. She didn't use any fertilizer, she just gave it water and sun. As she patted the earth around its roots, her hands stained with clean, dark soil, she thought about the difference between burying and planting. One was an ending, the other was a beginning. She had spent 3 years tending a garden of secrets. Now she would spend the rest of her life growing something that could see the light. The door to her kitchen opened. Her sister, Celeste, came out carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Still talking to your plants?" "Always," Annika said, smiling. She took the mug, her strong, capable hands warm against the ceramic. They were no longer tools for hiding the truth. They were just hands, and they were hers. So what does the story of a gardener and a crime lord tell us about how power really works? It shows us that the most effective prisons aren't made of walls, but of invisibility. Choi Seo-jin didn't just bury evidence in his garden, he buried the truth in plain sight, trusting that no one would question the beauty on the surface. He built his empire on a simple calculation, that the people who served him, the gardeners, the maids, the drivers, were part of the scenery, not witnesses to the crime. That their silence was guaranteed by their need, by their vulnerability, by the sheer audacity of thinking a billionaire's soil could be anything but clean. Annika Vance proved that calculation wrong, not with a weapon, but with attention. With the patience to notice that the roses were too red, the soil smelled wrong, and the earth was being packed down in the dark. Her power came not from authority, but from intimacy with the very ground he thought was his to control. This case cracked open more than a garden. It revealed the ecosystem of corruption, the compromised agent, the paid-off expert, the terrified witness, the silent politician. It showed how a crime is not a single act, but a network of enforced silences. Seo Jin's mistake was believing the network was unbreakable. Annika's courage was pulling on a single thread. But the lingering question isn't about him. It's about the gardens we all live in, the systems we work for, the institutions we trust, the beautiful surfaces we are told not to question. How many secrets are buried in the fertile soil of our own normalcy, tended by people we've been trained not to see? The lesson of Muriwen is that truth is not always discovered by those who are looking for it. Sometimes, it's unearthed by those who are simply tending to their work, who know the land well enough to sense when something in it is dead. The world is maintained by countless hands, hands that drive the trucks, clean the offices, guard the doors, till the soil. And in their collective memory, in their unnoticed observations, lies a map to every buried secret. Annika Vance now tends a different garden, a smaller one, a truer one, and the most profound change isn't that a crime lord is in prison. It's that a woman who was told she was part of the landscape now knows she holds the map. She remembers what her hands can do. They can bury or they can plant. What we choose to grow and what we refuse to let stay buried is the only difference between a garden and a graveyard. If you found this story of buried truth and unexpected courage compelling, make sure to subscribe. We dig up a new story every week. Thanks for watching.